Want to expand the reach of your content? Start a podcast. Feature industry experts on your show and leverage the influence and reach of your guests to grow your brand. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carbary. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. Today is another episode in our Behind the Curtain series. I've got with me my good friend, James Carbary, founder and CEO of Sweetfish Media. James, how's it going today, man?
I am doing well, dude. Super stoked to dive into this one.
Absolutely. So you and I just got back from a multiple day conference for one of our customers, and they did something very interesting that we think a lot of B2B brands could learn from. And that was they set up a podcast booth at their conference and got you and I thinking about a lot of the benefits of setting up a podcast booth at a conference, whether it's one that you host, one you're exhibiting at, or any other sort of conference that you're sending a few people to. So we're going to be talking about some of the benefits specifically that you can get from setting up a podcast booth at a conference. And the one we were just at, we were at Ingram Micro's one event out here in Denver. So it was just up the road from me, which was fun. And they partnered with Cisco to design a really cool experience. And so it actually had a unique draw compared to kind of your standard booth experience. Can you talk about that a little bit, man?
Yeah. So the fact that they really broke the mold and they didn't look like just another boring booth at the event, they went really elaborate with it. You obviously don't have to go, as elaborate as Cisco did, but I think you do have a lot of really creative opportunities to stand out in a sea of sameness by setting up some sort of a podcast booth. So what Cisco did, they had it themed. It was like a 90s theme to go along with the theme of the conference, basically saying, the 90s paged and they want their technology back or, something like that. And so they had Surge, the energy drink from the 90s. I think it was an energy drink set up on the table. They had, Nirvana poster on the inside door as you walked into the podcast booth, a bunch of little knickknacks around the booth, those snap bracelets. So they themed the booth around the conference. And then they actually had headphones set up on the outside of the conference so people walking by could actually listen in. And I wasn't sure how well that was going to work. It actually worked really well. I saw people throughout the event stopping and putting on headphones to hear the conversation that you and whatever guest was in there at the time were having. So that was really fun. They had the little wet wipes right next to them. And then they had the person working the booth that would go around and, engage with everybody that was coming up to the booth and then wipe down the headphones after someone left. So just a lot of really creative things that they did around the booth. They had a sign outside the booth with a big QR code that allowed people to scan the QR code and subscribe to the podcast, which I thought was really, really smart. So the uniqueness of the booth really drove a lot of foot traffic to their area, as opposed to, just looking like this, another vendor in a sea of vendors. So I really liked that. The other thing that this allowed them to do was really do content-based networking. And we hear all the time people talk about, the importance of setting up meetings prior to going to a conference. And what better way to do that, to set up meetings with the people that you're wanting to connect with on site, whether they're an existing customer, or potential customer, or partner, whatever the case may be, asking them to be on your show and to do an interview for your podcast while they're at the event. They're already there. The likelihood of them saying yes to that is probably pretty high. It gets them coming to you in your quote unquote booth area. And so you can engage them in person. And so I think that Cisco did an incredible job of engaging the people that they wanted to talk to on site at their event. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for anyone with a show, or really anyone that's wanting to have more conversations at events. I think this is just a fantastic way to do it. You had a couple other kind of takeaways from this, Logan. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get to those too, but I also want to camp out on what you just said about content-based networking, because we had another James Huddleston from Certain, who they have a podcast called Masters of Events, and their platform is an event marketing platform. And when he was on B2B Growth recently, he was talking about the enormous increase in meetings that SDRs set by making that change that you were talking about, not trying to set up meetings from conversations that happen at an event, but going into an event, trying to set up meetings at the event. And just that shift, I think it was something like 75% increase or something. You have to check out that episode with James from Certain for the exact stat. I don't have it in front of me, but if you combine that increase, not even talking about, the podcast booth, and then you add in the uniqueness of, hey, let's set up a meeting while you're there at the event, and let's feature you on our podcast. And then, like you said, that draw of then people around, the studio at the Cisco booth at the Ingram Micro One event was glassed in. They had an on-air sign as well. And we set up some podcast arms that made it look like a 90s radio station. And all of that was a draw to get people to say yes, the people that you might want to talk to that to be guests, and then drawing more people in to the booth itself. The other thing, what we executed here, and I think what any team can learn from this, is you're able to stockpile a ton of content. So one, people that you want to meet with, potential prospects, current customers that you want to get time with at an event, you can get them to be a guest on your show because they're going to be at the event, and it's a nice ask to feature them at your podcast booth, your on-site recording. But you can stockpile a lot of content with, the speakers. You've got people who are speaking and intelligently speaking on subjects that matter to your audience, whether that's cybersecurity or marketing or sales or HR, whatever the topic is of the conference. You've got a lot of speakers there that have good things to say. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing keynotes and leading breakout sessions and those sorts of things. So you can get access to guests and stockpile a lot of that content, a lot of very good content that you might not be able to get otherwise, guests that you might not otherwise have access to. So that kind of relays to our second point there about getting guests on, but in another way as well. And then the last piece, kind of going off of this stockpiling content, we not only had the microphones and we had, a Zoom and a Tascam recorder to capture multi-track audio, but at each setup where we were recording podcast episodes at this event we did this week, we're also capturing video content. And so it allows you to get dynamic video content that isn't simply the talking heads on Zoom. If you're like us, you likely record most of your podcast episodes remotely. I mean, we talk about that a lot. You almost have to do that to keep up with the quantity and the consistency of your podcast. And, you can do some things to dress up the talking heads on Zoom, like, a branded frame and big caption bar and a big progress bar and those sorts of things. But those can only change it up so much. So take advantage of that unique opportunity. There's buzz, there's people around. We had people looking into the podcast booth and holding up their phone to take pictures of it. And so it creates buzz in person, but it also allows you to create video content for social that, oh, wow, this podcast is a thing, right? Even if you're 3 episodes in, you've got some dynamic video content to promote your show. And then the call to action on all of those short social media snippet videos should be subscribe to the show, make it very easy for them to do that. So those were my other things is, you've got a great concentration of potential guests in and around the conference, in the speakers as well. And then you can create a lot of great video content, feed that to your social team, and let them run with it from there.
Yeah, I especially like the piece, so many of our clients are starved for time. I mean, we're all starved for time. And so being able to go to a single event and stock up enough content for, 6 months of your show by being able to interview speakers, interview people that you're trying to set appointments with, getting so much content done over a 2 or 3 day span by really activating around a podcast booth, it really does save you an enormous amount of time because you're not going to have to create that content, later. You're getting to really batch create it all in one go. So I love both of those. Logan, if you have not already left a review for B2B Growth, I know we don't ask a lot because honestly, I get kind of annoyed when I hear podcasts asking all the time for reviews, but they really do mean a ton from a credibility standpoint, from an Apple algorithm standpoint. Especially if you're listening in Apple Podcasts, I don't even know how to leave a review on Spotify or any of the other ones. But if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review if you're getting value from this show. And so that's my kind of sign off for today. Logan, thank you so much for this idea. I know we just got back from this event and you had mentioned that you thought that this would be really, really helpful for us to talk about with other folks. And so I'm glad you brought this up. I think this really is going to help a lot of folks.
Yep, absolutely. And if folks want to take a look at some of the behind the scenes of what we did setting up and capturing some video at this event we were at this week, you can check out my Instagram feed. I'm at I am Logan Lyles. I saved a highlight, the Ingram Micro 1 event. So you can check out some of that. I'm sure we'll be doing more there. Their show is B2B Tech Talk. You can check that out as well. Thanks as always so much for listening, guys. We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.